Halloween might be over, but today we're taking a look at someone else who likes to play dress-up, Dr. Strange. No, not that one. Hugo Strange, a psychiatrist who figured out Batman's secret identity. Is this shrink worth my shrinking patience with platinum editions? Lie down on the couch and stick around. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation. Starting with the packaging, and there are a few strange things going on. More than just his name, I mean. Or that Platinum Edition sticker we'll get to later. First of all, it says that this comes from Batman Transference. Only problem is that there is no Batman Transference. The Transference story was under Gotham Knights. More importantly, he didn't wear this costume in that story. This version of the character actually comes from Legends of the Dark Knight, whereas this accessory comes from something else, and the artwork, while being from Batman Gotham Knights Transference, isn't actually of Hugo Strange in the Batman costume. At least the UPC just says Hugo Strange is Batman. In my review of the question, I did get a comment suggesting I might have been a bit too lenient given that it wasn't the same version of the character that was on the box, and in hindsight, I agree. At the very least, the name matches the character in the box, but honestly, nothing else does. Just because it's such a mishmash for packaging, I'm giving Hugo Strange 2 points. Moving on to presentation, and Hugo Strange stands at a staggering 7.5 inches, or 19 centimeters, and is near complete reuse of Batman Year 2. The only difference is the wired cape, the head obviously, and the upper torso, which has been resculpted to accommodate a new logo. To be honest, I'm conflicted. I do feel they chose a body that's too big for this character, but more on that in Playability. For another thing, and just like the box, the figure itself is kind of a mishmash. In Hugo Strange's early appearances in the comics, he wore just a straight-up regular Batman costume. In fact, he even wore a Bruce Wayne mask under the Batman costume. This figure takes some cues from that, but combines it with his look from Legends of the Dark Knight Prey. This was a much darker, more uncomfortable interpretation of the character. In that story, his Batman suit was just kind of cobbled together and not really accurate. This was the symbol that costume had, and ironically, these boots, which aren't accurate to Batman, are actually accurate to that version of the suit. That version of the suit, however, didn't have fins and were just regular gloves, and instead of a really cool utility belt, he just had a normal belt. So this is just kinda half and half. Additionally, I will say I don't love this plastic piece that they used up top, though I suppose if you want to imagine that the cowl is pulled down, that's okay. Still, from Year 2, we know it's really just meant to be bunched up fabric. I'd have much preferred they used this system from Detective Comics. The cape lays just so much more naturally this way, and this cape is really short. In fact, it's pretty well accepted at this point that the factory confused the capes for Adam West and Hugo Strange. The material's the same after all, and I have seen some collectors even switch the capes, which I'll probably end up doing myself, but I do need to review this guy first. The one thing I will not criticize this figure for, however, is the sculpted and painted detail of the head. Granted, the fact that it's this style of articulation does limit the head swap potential, but there is so much personality here, and I love it. Even little things like the veins in his temples and the wrinkles in his forehead. And just look at how well the teeth are painted. This head is incredible, and even though I have issues with the fact that they used this picture for the box, it's a spot-on representation of it. As a Legends of the Dark Knight Hugo Strange, certain things like the logo and even the boots are perfect. Other things, however, like the utility belt and fins on the gloves, harken back to a different era of the character, but none of those things have to do with the costume he wore in the Transference story. That said, the sculpted and painted detail of the head is absolutely spectacular. The really short cape, however, less so. Docking him for the cape and belt, and for presentation, I'm giving Dr. Hugo Strange 3 points. If you're enjoying this video so far, do me a favor and give it a like. Moving on to Posability, and I think we have a pretty good idea of what this body can do at this point. There isn't any articulation in the base of the skull. Instead, it's all at the base of the neck. That said, Hugo can look up this high, which for this body isn't that bad. As a reminder, this is straight, and then this is down, which is really good. He also gets a good, insane-looking amount of tilt, and while mine's a bit sticky, he also has side to side. Moving down and unencumbered by a plastic cape, he can raise his arm this high, and also gets complete rotation. He does have forward and back with the rotator cuff, but I'll warn you, they were pretty sticky and I had to pop them out and loosen them first. Luckily, there's no trouble with the bicep swivel, and I do have to concede McFarlane has some of the deepest bends on his double-jointed elbows. At the ends of the arms are wrist balls that can swivel and hinge either up and down or side to side. Moving to the middle, and Hugo has a diaphragm joint and a dumbbell waist. The arch back on this body is spectacular. Here he is standing straight, but alas, that hunch forward does leave a lot to be desired. He does, however, have a very nice amount of side to side, and of course, the very twisted Hugo Strange has a very good twist. Below the not exactly accurate belt for this particular costume, and Hugo Strange has the typical McFarlane hips. He can kick this high and split this wide, and while the twist isn't as good as a thigh cut, it's still pretty good. Moving on down, and we've got double jointed knees, toe articulation, and ankle balls that can swivel, hinge, and like Hugo Strange himself, from respected psychologist to raging lunatic, pivot. Thanks to the extra range in the head, Hugo has better articulation than most Batmans using this body. In fact, as is often the case, the only thing holding him back is the hunch forward of the diaphragm. For Posability, I'm giving Hugo Strange 4 points. Moving on to Playability, and compared to the question, I'm pretty okay with the piece count here. First things first, and of course Hugo comes with a trading card and a figure stand. If you want to read that, pause here. Otherwise, and throughout the video, we've been looking at these gestury hands, but he does come with those tried and true 3 Joker hands. This includes an accessory holding hand and a fist. The problem with these hands, of course, is that they have extraneous details that the other hands don't, so you really can't mix and match them, and honestly, they just look kind of out of place. And speaking of things being out of place, he also has this alternate Bruce Wayne mask. He can hold that like so. In his madness, Hugo Strange ended up wearing both the Bruce Wayne and a Batman mask. Just not in, Legends of the Dark Knight. Again, I cannot stress what a mishmash of different Hugo Strange eras this figure is. And I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of frustrating. So let's just take a moment to talk about what could have been. They could have done just a straight up reissue of Year 2, but in these colors, preferably though with the corrected boots, and this cape setup, include this head as an alternate, and then Hugo Strange would have just been a straightforward Batman figure with an alternate Hugo Strange head, so they could have sold it as a mainline figure instead of a hard to find Platinum Edition. Then there's option 2, which I would have preferred. Use the Nightfall body, but in these colors. Essentially, that would have been the Comic-Con version for those who missed out, just without the cell shading. Give it the Batman Reborn cape, again, Nightfall Batman as an alternate head, and then once again as a Batman figure, they could have sold it as a mainline release. Using the Nightfall body would have been good for one other reason. Hugo Strange is canonically only 5'10", compared to Batman being 6'4". So if Nightfall is your Batman of choice, that means that Hugo Strange towers over him. To make them at least the same height, you'd have to use Year 2. Going by the original Price storyline, however, I think the black and gray version of Hush would be your best bet. Even so, just imagining for a moment the Comic-Con Batman here as Hugo Strange, you can see why the height difference is way better here. And wouldn't you know, but that's how DC Direct did it when making their Hugo Strange. A great Hugo for those who want the character, but also a solid Batman option. If you were curious about a more classic Hugo Strange, here's that head on the Year 2 body. Obviously it fits since it's technically the same body, and with the exception of the incorrect boots, I do actually like this a lot. I have seen online where people are using Spider-Man Tombstone as a base body for a normal Dr. Hugo Strange, but that's gonna take a lot of customizing surgery. That said, if you wanted a Hugo Strange based on the way he looked in Gotham Knight's Transference, here's his head on the Hush body. This is much closer to the costume that Batman was wearing in that story, and honestly, this looks really good too. For another villain dressed as Batman, however, and here we have Two-Face from Battle for the Cowl. Otherwise, for a roll-to-scale comparison, here's Hugo Strange with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. And as always, here he is with Stealth Iron Man, not quite ready to give up his Halloween costume. I mean, it's not like Hugo's one to talk. Seeing how things could have been is frustrating, but I have to take this figure as it is, and as is, it's not bad. Admittedly, I'm pretty sick to death of these alternate hands and their extraneous details. That said, I love the inclusion of the Bruce Wayne mask, and even if it's a bit short, I do appreciate the wired cape. In terms of play value, the only issue with this figure is how it scales with other Batmans, which to be honest is a pretty big issue. Literally. He's too big. For playability, I'm giving Hugo Strange 3 3 points. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price, and I have a hypothesis. After seeing figures like Wave Rider and Vampire Shazam languish on shelves, I think store exclusives aren't doing as well. So unwell that stores might not want as many anymore. So instead of making a limited number of figures exclusive to one store, McFarlane's making the same amount but spreading them around. Retailers get the benefit of an exclusive without committing to a wall of peg warmers. Collectors, however, are stuck in a never-ending cycle of fetch quests. That doesn't mean there aren't still going to be some store exclusives, and of course this is all speculation, but it doesn't take a psychologist to figure out how this works. Between the accessories and wired cape, Hugo Strange is a much better value than, say, the Question, but based on availability, for price I'm giving him 3 points, averaging out to an only okay total of 3 out of 5. For more videos of someone else dressed as Batman, check out one of these, and until next time, play nice and have fun.